Buenas and half a day to all who've joined us this afternoon. This roundtable hearing by the Committee of Child Welfare, Youth Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women's Affairs, Disability Services, the Arts, Culture, Historic Preservation, and Agana Restoration is hereby called to order. Today is Monday, September 15, 2025, and the time is now 2:01. For the record, in accordance with the open government law, notices for this hearing were sent on Monday, September 8, 2025, and again on Friday, September 12, 2025. In addition, this hearing was noticed on the Guam Legislature website and the Guam Public Notice website. Before we proceed with the hearing, I'd like to reiterate some general rules of conduct for those in attendance. The conduct of this hearing shall be as follows. Written testimonies shall be submitted to the committee. Questions, discussions, and testimony shall be confined to the nature of the agenda. As committee chairperson on disability services, I am honored to convene this roundtable hearing focused on the inclusion of our deaf and hard of hearing community across government agencies. Nearly a decade has passed since Executive Order 2015-015 directed all government of Guam agencies to develop and implement language access plan. That order affirmed our legal and moral obligation to ensure meaningful access for individuals with limited English proficiency and those with disabilities, including deaf and hard of hearing residents. Yet today, many executive branch agencies remain non-compliant. Recent FOIA correspondences with the Department of Public Health and Social Services confirms that the agency does not have a formal language access plan on file. It also reveals troubling practices that place unlawful burdens on deaf individuals, such as requiring them to bring their own interpreters or secure employment contracts before receiving health certificates. These practices violate Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and they undermine the dignity and rights of our DHH community. This afternoon's hearing will begin with a presentation from the Department of Integral Services of Individuals with Disabilities, or DISID, who will provide an overview of the status of LAP implementation across government agencies. Their presentation will include a summary of current gaps in access for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, as well as a review of federal standards under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and the Culturally and Linguistically Appropriate Services, CLAS, framework. Following DISID's presentation, we will hear testimony from agency representatives, interpreters, educators, and community members. Their insights will help us assess compliance, identify barriers, and shape a legislative path forward. Our commitment to DHH inclusion is not just about compliance. It's about equity, accountability, and institutional trust. Let this hearing be a turning point towards lasting change. I thank each one of you for your presence and your advocacy and your partnership, Sidus Masi. So before we begin today's presentations and testimonies, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues, Senator Vince Borja, Senator Sean Gumatautau, and Senator William Parkinson. I'd like to take a moment to recognize Director Michelle Perez of the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities. Over the past several months, our committee has worked closely with DISID through constituent services and direct engagement with families navigating access barriers. It was through one of these meetings that the need for today's roundtable became unmistakably clear. At the same time, there's also a constituent out in the community and constituents that we have been engaging back and forth over the months, and hence that's why we're all here today. Aside from that, I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Ruel Drilon of DISID, who's also present today. So DISID's leadership is deeply appreciated, and I look forward to hearing their insights as we begin this important dialogue. DISID has been a steadfast partner in this effort, helping us identify systematic gaps, elevate community concerns, and advance meaningful inclusion for our deaf and hard of hearing residents. Director Perez and her team have worked diligently to prepare today's overview, and I want to thank them for their continued commitment to informing the island about the progress and the challenges that we face surrounding language access plan implementation. So on that note, Director Perez, the floor is yours. Please come forward and join us here. And Mr. Drilon. Sijus Masi to both of you for being here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Like the Senator mentioned, my name is Michelle Perez, and I'm the Director of DISID. And to the left of me is Mr. Ruel Jalan, we call him Ru. And he is my acting deputy director, but he is also a very intricate part in this whole process because he is also the administrator for the Division of Support Services under DISID, which also has our unit for ADA compliance. So he would be kind of the mastermind behind all the things that we're trying to do with DISID for the ADA compliance, as well as anything else that deals with some of our challenges that we have with regards to ADA. Let me go ahead and start off with some of the information that we have here. So just so that everybody understands how things have been going with regards to the executive order and the language access plan, it was brought to our attention by Mr. Lizama regarding the challenges and gaps that the whole island has with regards to access for not only individuals with a hearing impairment, but individuals with disabilities in general, also with regards to individuals not having English as their first language. So providing that, is required for all government agencies. What we've done within DISID is we've gone through the executive order again to look at it, and DISID is not the oversight and has no, enforcement capabilities to enforce LAP on any other government agency. So we do not have any real data to show what implementations have been done and what haven't been done in the agencies. However, we are, more than willing to be part of that process. And I can probably have Ru talk a little bit more about how we as an agency have already tried to work within ourselves to update our LAP within our agency.
Half day, everyone. Again, my name is Ruel Drilon. I'm the Support Services Administrator for DISID, Division of Support Services. I'm also the Acting Deputy Director for DISID as well. Thanks for having us. And I want to first start off by really publicly thanking Mr. Kevin Lizama-Regis for being an incredible advocate for the deaf and hard of hearing community. I believe that it is because of his efforts that we are actually sitting here today talking about implementation of the LAP. So I should say that with regards to language access, I guess I can first say that language access is important, not only because it's a government initiative or whatever the case may be, but when we look at the diversity of our community today, we have a tremendous amount of cultural backgrounds. We have a tremendous amount of individuals from other places, which requires us as a responsible government to be able to accommodate as best we can, and language being one of those key areas where accommodation is necessary. Having said that, the language access plans that were called out by the 2015 executive order, in reality, over the years has really taken a back seat with many agencies. And again, I think because we're here, we realize that that is the case, that we are now in the mode of trying to get put together and encouraging the different agencies around the government to have a language access plan. In terms of DISID specifically, DISID has updated our language access plans for both the individuals with disabilities, both in the support service areas as well as with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. I should say that what transpired in the executive order in 2015 has been updated in as recent as this year. President Trump issued a memorandum rescinding the 13166, basically asking folks to take back what they've done with the language access plan in terms of its development and try to rethink ways that we can become more creative to make English as a primary language for the Americas. And so in our current language access plan, we've incorporated some of what is on the President Trump's memo with regards to the language access plan. For example, the inclusion of technology, right? The ability to use, iPads or software that would allow for translation or interpretation on the spot. And so this is something that as, agencies begin to develop the language access plan is not so much, definitely take a look at what happened in 2015 through 13166 provision, but really to go currently to 14 and figure out, well, what is going to be the guidance going forward. So with President Trump's initiative, based on just the timeline that he's put out in the memo, it looks like we won't have any guidance until January of this year. So, I guess what we can do now is just go with what we have today, right? But also to consider what in the future he has in store so that we can incorporate it in the current language access plan, because I don't suspect that 6 months from now we're all going to rewrite language access plans, right? So if we're going to do it now, we should do it now. We should do it smartly. So that said, we've incorporated, like I said, different areas of the language access plan, which we feel are key elements really for agencies to consider. For example, the different language services. Whether it's direct communication in languages other than English, whether it's interpretation service or translation services, and again, the inclusion of assistive technology. A big part of a language access plan is to include staff training and what that actually looks like. And I know there's conversations about what ideally that should look like and what is practical in terms of what that should look like, right? And so I think the executive order calls for like an annual training, an awareness training of the need to have language access. But I think it also goes, beyond just the language, right? We can think about, for example, culturally, linguistic, accessible services, right? CLAS services. And, the University of Guam and others have really done a great job in trying to promote CLAS education, right? To students and to pretty much the general public. And I think that's something that needs to continue in order for us to develop the language access. Because again, language is not, in this particular sense, is not only for the deaf and hard of hearing, but it's also for those whose language or English is not their primary language, right? And so the idea that we need to be able to accommodate that in the best, in the most reasonable way is something that we all need to take a look at. Another critical factor is really the monitoring and the updating of the language access plan. One of the unfortunate things, this is just Ruth speaking, is lack of data around deaf and hard of hearing. In 2022, the CDC came out with a behavioral risk surveillance that said out of all adults with hearing impairment, right, 9% of those are deaf and hard of hearing. But there's really no, what does that, where does that number come from, right? And so in the last couple of years, DISID has been very intentional in trying to work towards a targeted assessment survey to specifically look at the population of Guam and to specifically count and survey these specific disabilities so that we have something locally. This is part of actually kind of a broader Pacific region initiative. I participate in the the data, the disability data statistics for the region, and it's what do you call it? It's an initiative that the entire Pacific region is trying to figure out what's the best way to collect data, to interpret that data so that it's applicable to the people that actually live here, right? As opposed to national data, right? Which is really important, right? Because it's through that then we can develop robust programs like a LAP and some of these other policies, right? It turns into more needs-based policies than, or rights-based policies than needs-based, right? I know I've spoken about that many times before. So this is what we're doing now. And so when we look at really the impact of the deaf and hard of hearing community today, if we numerically put a value to it, one can say in terms of total disability, it's not so significant, but that's not really an excuse, right, for us to not be able to accommodate it. And so as agencies begin to develop their language access plan, to really think about, you know, not only to accommodate those who's deaf and hard of hearing, but also, again, those that have, you know, language barriers where English is not their primary language. Okay?
Well, just to interject that DHH community is not just, you know, the scope of this is really not just within the DHH community, but truth of the matter is there's really a lot of individuals, the hard of hearing, especially towards the, you know, aging process, as we tend to be manamkos.
Right.
This is a reality that we are confronted with. So that's another faction that we might also consider. Correct?
Yes, I agree with that. Absolutely, absolutely. And again, you know, we have folks from Cedars here, but again, you know, they do an outstanding job in collecting information with regards to newborns, right, that have hearing impairments, right, and so that goes through the lifeline, right, through the life course, and so, you know, your point about how that then transcends to the, you know, young adults and into middle adults and then to older adults, absolutely, and so definitely a consideration that needs to be made, for sure.
I just wanted to also, you know, touch a little more on the gaps, right, the current gaps. And so since I've been with DISID, and I mentioned this before in previous meetings with you, is that a big challenge with the community and the government agencies is that, especially during COVID and then after the big typhoon, is access to ASL interpreters. If we're talking specifically to the deaf and hard of hearing population. And, you know, unfortunately, there just aren't enough. And so we still have the obligation to provide that service. And so, you know, just to give you some insight onto how critical it is when I first came on board with my former director, there was an individual, a young lady who was sexually assaulted. And we got a call from GPD, you know, saying, please, we need help. We need to figure out how to get this individual to really be able to communicate. So the trauma alone of having that happen, and then on top of that, no one there to really communicate, was very traumatic in itself. And then having to re-say this whole thing again because this person didn't understand, or, you know, they're trying their best, you know, to either communicate via written text, you know, whatever it could be. But, you know, for something like that, you know, we kind of got to look at the specific situations and really think, like, we need to be there for these individuals. We need to provide that service. So, you know, I know when we spoke with Mr. Lezama, you know, he did bring up some good ways to try and bring out more people to do interpretation and stuff. And what incentives can we provide? And I think that's something that we all as a community need to figure out, you know, because it takes a certain person too to be able to do that, right? Not everyone can be an ASL interpreter. And I know the courts, they also have their pool of interpreters, but I think we're all just pulling at them from all different directions. DOE has them as well, so we're all trying to fight for the same little pool. So we need to figure out an opportunity for individuals who want to be interpreters, whether they be family members who become certified or, other individuals, and give a good incentive for this program to happen. And of course, the use of technology and getting that out there as well. But, every time I think about gaps, and when I saw this again, I just keep thinking about that young lady, and I think about, other things, like a person who gets pulled over because a person who's hearing impaired can drive. So how do you communicate with the law enforcement officer when you're trying to say, I have a hearing impairment, but they may think of it as being aggressive because they're trying to communicate. So those are some things, and DISID has, and so has CEDARS, provided disability and sensitivity awareness training to our Government of Guam employees, first responders, and it's also part of the post requirement. But it's not to say we can't do more, right? So I just kind of wanted to put that out there so we have a bit better perspective that it's not just the agency having to put something on paper. And I think also too, a lot of the agencies, at least I feel that they are providing, they may not have it in writing, but they also have an idea of what type of access they're providing to these individuals. So it's just more so about having something in writing where it's something that any person that comes in knows what needs to happen and how to get to that point to provide access, for these individuals with disabilities or those who have English as a second language. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Perez and Deputy Director Ru. Does that encompass your no further statement? So at this point, I'm gonna open the floor to my colleagues if they have comments or questions that they wanted to put on the table. Senator Vince Borja.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't necessarily have questions in regards to your presentation. I was wondering when anyone else was going to come. So at least to address some of the things that they brought up, I think for me particularly is the institutions, right, in regards to addressing. I know there's a lot of challenges across the government in regards to specific skill sets, like working with GDOE, with SPED, and also the the specialists that they need to fulfill a lot of the positions that they need. But just kind of curious in regards to, I know I talked to UOG a lot as well in some of the things, not just teacher shortages, but in regards to addressing this shortfall. So I'll just wait for comments from the university and what they have in mind.
Thank you,
Sorry, can I just make a comment on that?
Deputy Director Ru.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think in a larger scale, what I think you're asking is, that every agency also consider the scope of the necessity of the implementation of a language access plan, right? Because, for example, you might have employees that are not public-facing employees, right? So to what extent do the public-facing employees need to embrace, or what part of a language access plan would, right, will be their scope of work versus those that, or other agencies who are not necessarily public-facing, right? So the, agencies really need to do a deep dive into really what their missions are and the populations they serve, and then develop around that, right? Of course, with the guidance that's provided. But thanks for bringing that up.
I was curious because when you look at, and I don't like to compare it to the military, but when I was in the military, right, of course, you have, everybody was a soldier, and then everybody had a specific training, and then on top of the specific training for their job, there were these specialty skills.
Yeah.
And I feel like even when we look at, obviously, GDOE with a lot of their shortages, especially with SPED, right, and one-on-ones, is because not a lot of people are being attracted or jumping over to that side. I guess we can look at where it just becomes an additional skill, like kind of a skill set that you have to acquire as just an employee of the agency, right? Because it just, now, I'm not saying we're going to force it on them, but because there's such a shortage, that maybe there's just some additional training that employees probably should, not say mandate, right? Because we don't like to tell people what to do, but some of encourage them as like an additional skill that they could get certified in. It's kind of like the same thing in trying to address the problem, but I feel like we need to figure out a creative way to force it on them without forcing it on them. So at least, because my wife's a school counselor, and as much, she's not SPED certified, but because she's a school counselor, she has to manage and work with students with disabilities. So of course there is some additional training, but I then told her, like, maybe you should just go become SPED certified, because at the end of the day, the department is so short that it's better to have it and be prepared than to not have it and just sit around and wait to say, well, we're gonna have to wait till the department sends us a SPED certified specialist to address the need in the schools. And so those are just some things that I was thinking about as you guys were talking.
So I think with that, I mean, it's always great to maximize the current staff or the current resources you have, but I believe incentive would also be very paramount, because if you have a teacher, because I came from DOE, I was there for 20 years under special ed as well, and so if you have a general ed teacher and you want them to, obviously they are working with students with special needs. They don't have maybe the certification. Special ed provides support. But if that teacher perhaps wants to become a special ed certified teacher and move into a different, there needs to be some type of incentive for teachers. And even sometimes you have school aides that know sign language or can speak a different language, and you bring them in. There should be some type of incentive. Is like, why am I going to do additional work? I mean, let's just face it, right? Why am I going to do additional work but not get compensated when I could still just be a school aide and not have to do the additional services? You know what I mean? I just think that, if you're going to empower them to do additional work, then you need to empower them with an incentive as well.
Thank you. That's a valid point that you have raised, Director Perez, and it's something that we will take a look into. So thank you for that. Senator, you're good? Thank you. Senator Sean Gumatautal?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I got to say that this conversation, at least for me, it's not lost on me, just so you guys know. In my other life as Director of Policy for the Judiciary, I spent at least 3 years of my time supporting the language assistance program of that particular branch. And I think many in this room, because I think I've had at some point came across some of you at that time, but the Judiciary's language assistance program, in response to the executive order, it's hard to doubt, but it is one of the most robust programs in the government of Guam today. They do provide sign language support on top of the many languages, and they do have other access to many other languages that might not be here through a bigger network, obviously through their court system. And I think that as we look about try to look for solutions for our executive branch agencies, we may want to take we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We should be looking at what's already working in another branch. Case in point, you mentioned compensation. Probably the most important part of why they've been successful with their program is because every single person that's there is an independent contractor. And many of them are also working in schools, at the university, pick a program at the airport, with much of law enforcement and our public safety today, because they're able to, they do have that business license, which is a requirement, but then we're not saying that we shouldn't try to adopt a program from a different place. They provide support at the hospital, at public health, and you name it. And then I think one last observation, and if I could, is when we're talking about the idea of there's like this lack of data perhaps, but I think for all of us, we can all attest that, again, looking across our sister branch on how they pull the information, so we're not kind of replicating something and doing it more, more than once. I mean, they're not here. That would have been Madam Chair, I think moving forward, and I think if we do this again, it would make a lot of sense to have the Judiciary's Language Assistance Program folks here. They are a deep bench that I think that the executive branch can add, because I can't even begin to tell you how many times I referred many executive branch agencies or referred the judiciary's folks to the executive branch on so many different issues. So I'm hoping that maybe after this conversation, don't hesitate to reach to the Chief Justice and ask for their assistance with the creation of the plan. I do have other questions, but I think if it's okay, Madam Chair, I can wait till we hear other presentations, because I do have a couple that are focused on Post and some of our folks from the university. But if I could hold off on those questions, I'll wait for them. Is that okay? All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Sean. Actually, we have a long list of stakeholders that we invited, and one of them is the judiciary. So they actually sent their testimony. I will announce everyone later, but at this point, I'd like to give the, thank you, Mr. Senator Gumatautal, thank you. I'd like to give the floor to one of the members of the Disability Committee, and Senator Will Parkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate this conversation today. You know, as an advocate for citizens with Americans with disabilities, I think this was an overlooked aspect of what we need to do. And I really appreciate some of my colleagues' comments regarding the institutions that we got to work with here. You know, I want to tell a little story. When I moved here from the Philippines when I was 3 years old, I moved here to Guam. My mom enrolled me in school. I went to JQ San Miguel. And, you know, my mom, she has a very thick Filipino accent, and they see that, oh, this kid's from the Philippines, you know. So obviously, like the first day of school, they put me in Loti. And Loti is the language other than English, and it's an institution that was in there to help students who did not have English as their primary language catch up. Fortunately for me, when I moved here to Guam, my grandma was very thrilled to have me in her life every day. So she always read me stories to sleep. You know, my favorite was she actually read me the novelized version of Batman Returns, you know. That was my favorite. But it meant when I went into school, I had a very good base for the English language, and Loti was not necessary for me. But it did make me very aware at a young age that these institutions were there and that they were important. And for us as the next generation of lawmakers, it's important for us to maintain those institutions. And to that end, you know, when we talk about like budgets and stuff in this chamber, I know a lot of the times, you know, we've kind of been in a prolonged period of austerity despite some of the record budgets we've had. And a lot of these agencies come in here with, here's what we basically need to survive. You know, here's our warm bodies list, and we're lucky if we get 80 to 90% of that. And so, you know, part of this conversation to maintaining and expanding these institutions that we've inherited is, you know, I would like to know what our budgets look like when they are not starvation budgets. You know, when we are actually asking for budgets that can upgrade our schools adequately for ADA compliance, that give whatever this generation's version of the LOTI program is, what resources do they need that they can service as many people, so that when I look at the percentage of translations that are needed, how could we get it so that more people are speaking English when English is not their first language? You know, what does that look like in a dollar perspective? Because ultimately that is the most meaningful decision we can make as lawmakers, is giving you the resources to do your jobs as best as possible. And so I know we've been coming into the legislature on the regular budget year, and here's what we need. So, but I would also like you to think about the number beyond that, you know, the number where if for whatever reason the United States government decides to drop money from helicopters, what does the true price tag to achieve our missions and be successful in these institutions look like? That's really my question for you guys to take home with you today. And that's what I have. Thank you, Mrs. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. On that note, it's very timely that you mentioned that, because my question is, very important question, are there any federal funding streams or grants that Guam could pursue to support LAP implementation and DHH inclusion? Not that we know at the moment. Okay. Has DISID applied for or facilitated access to any of these funding opportunities in the past? And what were the outcomes or the likes?
On the support services side, we haven't addressed, or we have applied for grants. In fact, we're waiting on a response from one grant now. Hopefully it comes up in October, but it's more for data repositories. So I think it's, you know, they're not grants specifically for language access,
Yeah.
but they're grants that are, that will aid in the development of programs like LAP, for example. So there are no specific, you know, a few months ago we had the, one of the directors from the ACL visit our office, and, you know, being rude that I am, I just asked the question, I said, how much money does the federal government have for persons with disabilities between the ages of 18 to 59? And she stared at me and said, none. So the pickings are small. And so when we, you know, we try to find grants, like for example, this latest one is a TAP grant, you know, to try to, you know, try to work around it and try to obtain that, you know, that kind of funding. But yeah, I mean, that's the reality of it today, and yeah.
Senator, so the reason why Rue had mentioned the age between 18 to 59, because that's the biggest age gap for services not being delivered to individuals with disabilities. That is because from preschool, even from birth to 18, maybe up to 21, DOE kind of has a grasp on these students, right, these children, and then from 60 and beyond, there's the senior citizens, Division of Senior Citizens. So the gap really is the 18 to 59-year-old population. And so we have tried several times looking into different grant opportunities and funding opportunities. There isn't. And, you know, so really the services that we provide, the direct services that we provide to these individuals within that age range actually is locally funded, fully locally funded. And, you know, we've been getting the funding, which is great. We've been able to expand some of our services. You know, obviously we would always want more money, but what we have, we work with, and we've been doing pretty well with what we have so far. But we never stop continuing to look for different grant opportunities. As you heard, Rue did ask one of our grantors for another, you know, for one of the grantors that provides funding to different agencies, if the 18 to 59-year-old population has specific funding, and there isn't. So, you know, we continue to ask, you know, that's all we can do at this point.
Thank you so much. I do not have further questions, but in the event that something arises, we're going to send an email to you guys.
Of course.
Thank you. I appreciate your
Thank you.
testimonies and
Appreciate it.
your explanation and your presentation.
We'll be
Truly
here if
appreciate
there's any other
Yes,
additional
please.
questions.
Yes, because we're going to go
course.
into our roundtable later.
Senators, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Before we move forward into the next portion of today's roundtable, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the government entities that have joined us to share their views on language access plan implementation and deaf and hard of hearing inclusion. The committee extended invitations to the Guam Department of Education, GDOE, the Department of Public Health and Social Services, DPHSS, Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, GMHA, Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, GBHWC, the Office of the Attorney General, AOG, and the Guam Fire Department, GFD, the Guam Police Department, GPD, and the Judiciary of Guam. All were given invitation. Some of them submitted their testimony. If you are present, some could not make it today, unfortunately, but if you are present and you have your testimony, we would like to invite you to join us in the panel, please. GDOE. Do we have, Mr. Swanson, you want to join us? Okay. No, you're going to. Community of UOG, for UOG, yeah.
You're supposed to have answers all on top.
Yeah.
It's the brain of the president.
Before you begin your testimony, can you please state your name and your agency? Public Health also. So on the panel, we have representatives from Public Health, GDOE, University of Guam, and Guam Behavioral. Is it going to be age before beauty, or is it going to be?
Buenas and Hafiday, Senator Calvo, Senators. My name is Jennifer Cruz, and I'm submitting testimony on behalf of Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center. Our Director, Krista E. Pangilinan, and our Deputy Director, Dr. James Cooper Nurse. Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center is committed to supporting the implementation of Executive Order 2015-15, which requires all Government of Guam agencies to develop and implement language access plans. We appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion and would like to address the following key areas as outlined in your request. The current LAP implementation efforts within Guam Behavioral Health. So currently, we have an interim policy for the Language Assistance Program. Our internal policy committee is currently reviewing and updating all relevant policies, including the Language Access Plan, to ensure that they not only meet current legal and regulatory standards, but also reflect best practices in the field. This process is an ongoing effort, and we anticipate the finalization of our updated LAP policy by April of 2026 in time for our next accreditation review. Access to counseling, psychiatric services, and emergency care for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. JBWIC utilizes CIRICOM, which is a language interpretation service provider that offers real-time professional interpretation in over 200 languages, including American Sign Language. CIRICOM ensures that individuals with limited English proficiency or those who are deaf or hard of hearing can access critical healthcare services without language barriers. To access CIRICOM, our staff simply need an internet connection for quick and easy access to interpretation services, whether in person or remotely. We have recently implemented annual training on accessing CIRICOM services to staff. Operational challenges and areas for improvement. While we have made significant strides in implementing CIRICOM and expanding access to language interpretation services, there are several operational challenges that we continue to address. One challenge is ensuring that all staff are fully familiar with how to use CIRICOM effectively, as awareness and familiarity with this tool can vary. Additionally, while Seracom is accessible via internet, access to stable connections can sometimes be problematic, particularly doing outreach efforts or in remote areas. This can delay or hinder the ability to provide timely interpretation services. Another significant challenge is the scarcity of local interpreters, especially those fluent in languages such as American Sign Language. This shortage makes it difficult to accommodate clients who require an in-person interpreter, which is often the preferred option for many. Additionally, the lack of specialized training for interpreters in behavioral health setting further compounds this issue, as many interpreters have not yet completed this crucial training. This gap in training can hinder effective communication in sensitive and complex behavioral health settings that may ultimately impact treatment. These challenges highlight the need for ongoing staff training, as well as exploring additional strategies to improve internet access and interpreter availability to ensure more seamless and comprehensive language access for all of our clients. We would like to sincerely thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony and contribute to this important discussion, and we look forward to continued collaboration in ensuring that all individuals have equitable access to services they need. Undankling Nasizo's Maasi, Carissa Pangolina, our director, and Deputy James Cooper Nurse. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another testimony? Just that one, right? Okay. Thank you for your testimony. What we're going to do today is we're just going to go ahead and finish all their testimonies, and then we can fire away with our questions. Thank you, colleagues. Ma'am?
Thank you, Senator Calvo. I'm going to have my team distribute some folders for you, so you could maybe just follow along. I did not prepare a formal written testimony today, so what I'd like to do is just talk you through some of these documents.
You had me at the folder.
All right. We want to help. That's what I want to say. All right. Well, thank you, honorable senators, for the invitation for a seat at the table and to share with you what we do at the University of Guam to support the language access plans. Now, if you take a look at the 3 columns on the worksheet here, community access, the resources, and next steps. So we have put some thought to this in addition to what we have already been doing. So if you take a look at the first column, it says current programs supporting interpreter education and language access workforce development. We recognize there is a gap in capacity. So UOG currently offers a sign language course, but not an interpreter education program. I believe that particular certificate program is offered at the Guam Community College. UOG administers the Guam System for Assistive Technology, also known as GSAT, the project that provides awareness and demonstration of assistive technology devices and services for improving access to all aspects of life, such as learning, employment, and daily living. So that is housed in the Dean's Circle alongside the other quote-unquote houses of Cedars. Okay, accessibility. Of campus services, public-facing communications, and digital platforms for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. UOG has the structure and capacity to provide reasonable accessibility services upon request through designated staff and offices to process disability accommodation requests from students through the Disability Services Office, faculty, staff, and the community through the EEO ADA office. UOG also has the capacity through the Moodle online learning platform for captioning and provides training to faculty on its use. Now, I want to be clear about the differences with regard to the kinds of services we provide or how we can even go about providing services, right? And many of you here at this table, including Mr. Tom Babauta, right, are very familiar with that. Because students, when they come to us at 18, they are adults, right? So one, they need to self-disclose, right? And then they need to have the documentation. When they bring that documentation to our office, that is when our ADA counselor and academic advisors step in to develop the accommodations for that particular student so that he or she can be successful in the classroom and have equitable access. Now, we have 2 ADA offices on campus, one specifically for student services, and the second for our employees or our staff members and faculty. Very different offices, very different functions. All right, so the recommendations with regard to the community access is for interagency collaboration, policy development, and a sustainable language access program implementation across education and government sectors. UOG is an equal opportunity provider and employer, and of course we are committed to island wisdom and the values of Inadahi and Inagofli'i. There are many things that we are able to do, and we have engaged, really looked for grants. It's very limited. What we know is CEDARS does a fantastic job of leveraging resources to provide training and workshops and information to the community and the region at large. And so we leverage that kind of knowledge and that kind of training as well on the campus. Now, if you take a look at one thing I want to add also to community access is in our website, we also have chat features, right? For those who may be hearing impaired, that they can type in what their questions are, right? So those chat features are in the RFK page, as well as the Office of Information Technology. It's not necessarily across the entire website. We are in the midst of a website redesign and upgrades, but we know that students, or those with hearing disabilities or hard of hearing have that kind of access. Okay, let's take a look here. So the resources here, you can take a look. These are the web pages, right, or the links to where the resources can be found on our website. And the next steps. We have taken proactive steps to move forward with the language access plan. We are now exploring how to support professional workforce development to increase the pool of qualified providers, interpreters, captionists, human transcribers. And to seg into the next column here, we've partnered with the National Deaf Center. Fantastic resource, and they want to work with the University of Guam and other agencies as needed. There's a lot to learn about being hearing impaired and the various services that's needed. Different age groups, different professions, it could be academics. But more importantly, I think we need a unified approach to policies, right? So that we can manage the resources that our hearing impaired and those who are hard of hearing can access. So as part of this partnership, we want to review the existing processes and resources on campus for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, identify opportunities to improve communications regarding accommodation requests for community members, to strengthen accessibility protocols and practices, increase knowledge and awareness of accessibility practices for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. UOG is committed to exploring interagency MOUs to ensure efforts for sustainable accessibility during college and during transition to employment, recommending policy standards and alignment across agencies, including fees, timelines, technology minimums, and backup resources, supporting the establishment of a centralized vendor, approved roster, and shared contacts across agency in similar disciplines: education, public health, healthcare, public safety. You know, the students, when they come in and they say, Professor or Miss Sally, here's my documents, I need help. If they need the assistive technology, okay, there's a document in there that you could take a look. And these are the language access and hearing devices available. Now, what's really important to stress here is that these devices are not just for UOG students. These devices are for members of our community. And so you could take a look at that independently. And we actually have, I brought with me a team today to answer any questions that you may have down the line. I've got our Interim Director of Title IX and ADA, Ms. Chris Sayama. I've got our Interim Dean of Enrollment Management and Student Success, Dr. Gina Rojas, and I've got two representatives from CEDARS, Dr. Josephine Cruz and Michelle Agigi, at your disposal today. Thank you.
Thank you. We truly appreciate that. Thank you for your testimony too, your explanation, and this very helpful reading material. And I just have to reiterate that I'm very impressed with your folder. Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon. For future reference, if we have another meeting, I would like to go before Dr. Bamba. I made a mistake there, so now I want to go work at UOG with that passion. Okay, so, good afternoon, Senators. Buenas and Afide, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tom Babauta, and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Special Education with the Guam Department of Education. When we talk about language access, our work at DOE has multiple layers. We're not only responsible for ensuring compliance for adult stakeholders, such as prospective employees, current employees, and parents of our students, but we also carry the responsibility of addressing the unique needs of our students. This includes those who are deaf and hard of hearing, as well as students who enter our schools with English as a second language. Every school on island has an ESL coordinator who works with our educational teams to identify language acquisition needs and ensure teaching and learning occur equitably. For students with disabilities, we have systems in place under Section 504 for accommodations and services, or through special education for those students needing specially designed instruction. Each year, individualized education programs are developed with goals, objectives, and supports. Importantly, during every IEP meeting, one of the standard questions we ask parents or guardians is, do you require an interpreter? Because meaningful participation depends on access. That access may come in the form of an educational interpreter, assistive technology, or other supports to ensure both parents and students can fully engage. Unfortunately, like many places across the nation, Guam is facing a shortage of educational interpreters. To address this, we worked in partnership with the University of Guam CEDARS and the Boys Town National Research Hospital. So we've done that for several years. And then more recently, the collaboration helped us develop an educational interpreter job series several years ago. One key standard we adopted was requiring proficiency based on educational interpreter performance assessment, which remains a nationally recognized measure of competency. And I'd like to talk about that a little more during the roundtable discussion. It is important to note that while I am speaking here specifically about educational interpreters who serve our students, the needs of the broader DHH community go beyond schools, covering access to meetings, conferences, and medical or public services. On Guam, our interpreters often step up to assist at community events as well. At the department level, Ms. Margaret Cruz serves as our language assistance coordinator, supporting individuals with limited English proficiency and those who are deaf and hard of hearing. We also have sought national partnerships, for example, with the National Deaf Center, who has provided technical assistance to Guam. The National Deaf Center is one of the IDEA funded U.S. Department of Education technical assistance centers. They originally visited in 2018 and again earlier this year, and we're working on collaborating with them to build sustainable systems for language access. I actually have a meeting with them later this week, and we're looking at things like build your own interpreter program. So we're looking at ways to increase the numbers while keeping the proficiency high. But we are also facing real challenges. Over the past 2 years, GDOE has lost 3 teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing, one through retirement, one who relocated, and one who sadly passed away. Later this week, we are convening discussions to determine next steps because we know that every gap in staffing directly affects the supports available to students. In closing, language access is not a compliance checkbox. It is an equity, dignity, and opportunity. It is about equity, dignity, and opportunity. On Guam, where multiple languages and cultures intersect, it is vital that our systems reflect that diversity and ensure that no student, no parent, no community member is left without a voice. Sejus Masi, and thank you for allowing me the time to share the DOE perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. Appreciate your testimony. Sir?
Good afternoon, Senator Calvo and esteemed members of the committee. My name is Peter John Camacho, Deputy Director at the department. And I apologize, I don't have an official written testimony. I do, in the last several weeks, have become aware of our need at the department to establish a language access program. We have in the different divisions, we do have efforts that have been made to address folks with disabilities, such as being hearing impaired, and then also the English as a second language that was, spoken about earlier. So we do have policies in place, we do have applications or opportunities for folks with those challenges to be able to request for assistance. We need to do better. As was mentioned, having access to American Sign Language interpreters is a challenge. We do have one in the entire department, and we are spread out throughout the island, so it would be difficult to maintain that person to be able to do that. So we need to figure out a better way to address that. In our public welfare side, there is surprisingly, there is a telephone number that they can call so that they can get assistance to whomever requires that kind of assistance, kind of like a TDD. And so trying to figure out how we can expand that to not only the public welfare side, but all to the other divisions as well. And so we are going to develop that language access program. As I said, we currently don't have one formally established that we can find in our records. So that's going to be a challenge in and of itself. And as someone who also is hearing impaired, I have 4 ears, I understand the need to be able to have that, having gone through the challenges of, just within your family, when you start asking questions or asking your family members, I'm sorry, what was that? And I think that after a while, the human reaction is, frustration. And so I've experienced that, and I've seen my family experience that challenge. And so that's what encouraged me to look for, additional ears. And it's actually been quite successful. I'm more able to enjoy conversations with many of, the folks we interact with. So it is important for the department to be able to have that language access program throughout the department, and it just has to be specific to the different divisions. We now have 7 divisions, and so we need to be able to ensure that all of our clients, all of the folks who come and seek services from us, we're able to respond appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Before I open the floor to my colleagues for questions, I'd like to ask Mr. Babauta, sorry, but I do want you to expound on build your own interpreter. You mentioned that earlier, and I'm quite interested in hearing more about it, sir.
Sure. So we clearly have gaps in services, and one of the first things we did in working with the University of Guam pre-service and with CEDARS was work on increasing the numbers of certified special education teachers. So we had the first cohort go through, and in the next few months, we'll have about 9 teachers that will be certified as special education teachers. So that will increase the pool. Following that trend, we're trying to look at increasing the numbers, because if we just leave it to folks to kind of on their own decide, I'm going to go this path, we're finding that it doesn't always work in our favor. So what we're looking at doing is we're aggressively trying to develop a program, entice them to come in, pay for the training and support, work with them so that they can get increased proficiency, and then hook them into our job series so that we can hopefully maintain them and keep them. So we're still in the infancy stage of the planning for that. We had engaged with CEDARS, like I said, and for the educational interpreter piece, we are looking with the National Deaf Center, and the National Deaf Center is introducing me to another center that we're going to be trying to figure out if it's going to be something we can handle locally, whether it's at the community college level, the university level, or via distance learning. And we're hoping to increase the numbers of educational interpreters. I want to note there are 2 types of interpreters. The educational interpreters are actually roughly start at about 40-something thousand a year across the nation. Your general regular interpreter is starting in the mid-60s. So there is a little difference in skill set and a difference in focus. We're focusing mainly on the educational interpreter piece, but when we brought the National Deaf Center folks out, we also had a community stakeholder meeting each time that they had come in, because we're not only setting the foundation for those students and families, we know that they need to go somewhere. So we're pulling the community together so that we can ensure that there's a nice transition into adult services, and that we increase the numbers of interpreters all around. Most of the time when we have any major events, people will reach out to DOE, and it becomes a conflict because they need to be at 5 different places, and the priority obviously is the students and the student needs, but any other times if the students aren't in class, then of course we try to help the community as well. So that's kind of where we're at. We're hoping that within the next year we can develop this program, get the first group of individuals on board, get them trained up, and then meeting the national Boys Town proficiency scale.
Thank you. Thank you for your clarification and explaining that further. Before I ask my colleagues if they have questions, I just wanted to give like a certain guidelines, just so when you throw your questions out there, I wanted to put it out there that the focus of our roundtable are 4 critical areas. So if you guys can actually come up with questions around that parameter, that will help us iron out a lot of issues. So the 4 areas, critical areas that we really wanted to explore here are identifying systematic barriers and service gaps. Number 2 is enhancing emergency communications protocol. Number 3 is funding and workforce development for interpreters, because we've been hearing that really that's the main problem and challenge that we've been facing for years and years now. And the last is strategies for community-driven LAP design. So these are the things, the 4 critical areas that we're actually trying to figure out in this roundtable. Anyway, on that note, I'm gonna open the floor for questions. My colleague, Senator Vince Borja, been kicking me under the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, when I want to focus a little bit on workforce development, because I think this is really crucial. We know the problems, we know the gaps. I think for me, the question to whether it be GDOE, UOG, or anybody here at the table or in the audience in regards to, I know earlier in the previous panel around, we talked about incentivizing, but I think we really need to deep dive, not just in this area, but because we're here talking about, LAP, is what is the plans, GDOE, or even the university in getting students to get into these programs. Because I don't think it's necessarily a human capital problem, right? We have people. It's just nobody's coming in. I know, obviously, working with GDOE over the last 9 months, you have people leaving these fields, right, and going over to other fields or leaving the department to go do other jobs. And so, what are your thoughts in regards to, from a policy standpoint, is how can we help, and how can we help address this shortfall in the workforce development side?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Senator Borja. Well, one, in our conversations with the consultants from the National Deaf Center, what they said was local capacity is not enough. I'm not just talking about warm bodies, I'm talking about the level of certification. And so we were advised that we actually needed a bachelor's program to prepare these individuals, as Mr. Babautas talked about, is educational translators, educational interpreters. And so we want to explore that. I think we have the capacity to do that. And the best way to do that moving forward is to partner with another institution until we are able to build our own capacity from within. And so I think that moving forward quickly and progressively with that kind of a program, quickly and progressively could still mean a few years, right, before they actually hit the workforce. But in the meantime, I think by continuing to support the training program that is available at the Guam Community College, as well as at the University of Guam, I am committed to providing some kind of certification process until we have the ability and the means to implement a new bachelor's program in this type of discipline.
Maybe I could just give a little bit of background. So I did mention that we had developed a job series, educational interpreter job series. Prior to that, we had school aides that were trained up and they received a lot of training and support. When the creation of the position came into effect, they had, one of the criteria was an associate's, but in government of Guam, if you have a, experience, then they can credit that towards education. So one thing, though, that they did look at was the Boys Town Educational Interpreter Proficiency Assessment. Now, that's something that was built in. It's a nationwide, nationally recognized assessment. When I did bring up that maybe we need to look at, in the interim, some lower proficiency scale, I got jumped. I almost got jumped by the whole room, because they're saying, no, we're not going to water anything down. We're going to bring everyone up. So what we're doing now is, for the current batch of folks, what we're doing is we're going to be implementing a regular series of assessments. We're going to be working on a plan for each of those individuals, how to get them elevated to the next level, part of the professional development program. And then we're also going to be looking at ways where we can connect with other institutions so that we can get additional folks trained up. So that's kind of where we're at. This has been something we've been trying to work on for several years. The other thing that we're looking at is in terms of pay. This is not one of those positions that fell under the BRIP, the Bonus Rewards Incentive Program. So the only thing that was in effect was when they slotted them in at Department of Administration, the slotting wasn't as high up as many of the interpreters felt like it needed to be. And that really was demoralizing for many of them, and we ended up losing several of them over the next year or two after that. So we may need to revisit that scale. We may need to look at including them into the bonus retention incentive program. And then we need to really provide the additional support and treat them as professionals. Right now, their complaint is that they're not always looked upon as a professional. They don't have time, for instance, to prep before classes, which makes sense, right? You want to not get the information right at the first time when someone's talking. You want to have that prep time like teachers do. So I think we're also revisiting the job series, and we're looking, because we haven't been able to get anyone qualified to apply. So this is where we're at that stalemate, right? We have set the standard high enough, but now it's so high that people aren't able to come into the position. So we're looking at that sweet spot where maybe we have some transition piece and we can elevate the ones that are there, and then we can bring others in, and maybe hopefully we can hook them into, you know, the system.
Thank you for that, Tom. No further questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Vince Borja, and thank you, sir. Apologies, my colleagues. I'm going to interrupt the question and answer just for a short bit to give way to Attorney Summerfleck. If I can invite you on the panel for your brief testimony, remarks, or input.
Thank you very much. As I sit here looking at my watch, knowing that I can get in trouble in another 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Senator Calvo. As an advocate, I can't help but notice that we have no closed captioning on either one of the screens.
We actually we had a technical issue. We were actually going to have one earlier. It was actually discussed in my office, but for some reason, we didn't. Apologies for that.
Well, and that...
The intent was there.
And that is important, but when we're talking about individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing, when we don't provide these accommodations, when we don't have an interpreter for a middle school child, when we don't have an interpreter for an elementary grade child, what does that really mean? And in my mind's eye, what that means is we have a child sitting in a classroom where Russian is being spoken. He understands nothing. He has no concept of what is being discussed. He may be able to track what's put up on a board, but in essence, what we are basically saying to that child is, you don't matter. And that's not a message I want to send to any child. I want to say that you're the most important thing to us, and that we care about maximizing your potential. I see the packet that was prepared by the interpreters. I'm not sure whether that's intended to be legislation or their own internal rules. I would opine that probably some of the difficulty that employers like DOE may be having is that if there's a view that I'm worth $40 or $50 to $75 an hour, and GDOE is going to pay me $10 an hour, I'm better off outside. And that's one of the things that I would caution about any legislative attempt to say what the value is for this service, because all of a sudden, everyone's going to leave DOE because they know that they're going to get $50 to $75 an hour from me. We have our public input session this Thursday morning, and we have arranged an interpreter. We've juggled around because at the last minute, after a month prior to making the arrangements, they had a conflict. But for us, that becomes key, having that interpreter there. And if we don't have that interpreter there, we're not doing our job. Now, I could put closed captioning and a screen up at the conference for everyone to read, but I believe we should show the dignity and respect and have an interpreter present. So the issue that we have in front of us, in my mind's eye, is do we want to completely exclude individuals from the conversation? And if we don't have interpreters, if we don't have closed captioning, that's what we're doing. I mean, I'll bring, and I didn't want to do this, but I will real quickly. I have a family member who's deaf. You know, throughout her life, if you didn't look at her when you were talking, she'd have no idea what you were saying. And that, to me, is a very hard reality. Now, she overcame some of her disability. To my mother's joy, she could read lips. So if we were sitting at Perkins or Embers, my mom would say, "What are they saying over at that table?" Because she could read the lips of everyone. So when you lose certain skills, you gain other skills. But how many people are fortunate enough to know how to read lips? If she didn't have that skill, she would be excluded from conversations completely. And that's really what we're talking about today. We're talking about inclusion, that everyone has a right to be at the table. And that's why I came today, to make sure we didn't lose sight of what the real point is. And the point, in my mind's eye, is we shouldn't be speaking Russian. And I use Russian as just an example. We should be speaking in a language that they understand. And I feel very badly when I hear about children who are in classrooms, because what can they do in that classroom? If they can't understand what's happening, if they have no means to communicate, if they speak in ASL and no one else does, they have no voice. If there's not an interpreter present, they have no way to know what's even being discussed. So I bring these forward to you to stress to you all the importance about what we're talking about, as well as the common sense aspects of it. I've employed an individual that was deaf and hard of hearing. We modified all of our practices inside the office for that individual. There are numerous electronic apps that are available. There are numerous interpreting services that are available. If we don't have that body, then we better have the technology to bring some other body in there that can interpret for our children and for our community members. And I focus on children because I believe that's our future. It applies across the board to everyone. So I'm very appreciative that I was able to give my 2 cents before I had to run to avoid getting in trouble, which I need to leave now for. Thank you very much, Senators, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Attorney Summerfleck. The use of a gadget and device to aid them were discussed earlier, so you'd be happy to know that that was raised on the table earlier. Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Attorney. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and proceed. Senator Sean Gumatao, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just one thing, if I can, just more of a clarification earlier when we were talking with DISID. The presidential executive order that was referenced by the Deputy Director, Executive Order 14224, that was signed on March 1st, 2025, it declared English as the official language of the United States. Now, the presidential EO revoked the August 2000 presidential executive order. However, the current one does not require or direct any change in the services provided by any agency consistent with what that was entered into just around 25 years ago. So it just basically stated more of the English language thing. And one of the things I wanted to go to what Peter John mentioned earlier, and it's almost a challenge to all of us, is that, and thank you to Public Health for that, but it was more of, we can all do better in what we're all, with the 4 agencies that are in front of us and with DISID. This is clear that we can do a much better job of delivering these important services to our community. And no, to stick with the barriers set by Senator Calvo, each of you have different barriers, and you've all expressed them pretty well. I can say from experience, at least in terms of dealing with the different agencies here, especially in front of us, that I think that you're doing your darn best. But if I can just say, one of the biggest barriers that we need to do, and this is more across of all of government, Madam Chair, I think when we think about the executive order, if you look at the date of the executive order, we can't be talking about this 10 years later. We should be implementing as quick as we can with all the resources that we can. Because I can attest at the university, I've been with the university teaching as an adjunct for 13 years. It's no problem when we have when we talk, it's in the handout. I spend every semester telling all of our students about the program and services of our EEO. They are 18-year-old young men and women. And in my classes, I appreciate that when I get a accommodation, they're like priority for me to try to take care of them. It sounds crazy to think I would prioritize them over my other students, but I can already say by the time they get to me, they're already behind by a day because they kind of figured, will I in fact take that accommodation? And all of us at the university and our dean can attest, we really work our butts off to try to accommodate all of our students. And so with that said, again, the barriers that we face, they're not uncommon to any of our agencies that are up here. I mean, I can think back, Peter John, during the pandemic, working with Public Health and having to convert all of the messages for COVID in all the different languages. But it talks about just the deep bench that the CDC has in terms of how did they communicate, in this case was a pandemic. And so for all of us, I think we probably need to go deep into our respective agencies and find those things that can get us past the barriers for us to achieve. Madam Chair, I only had one question, and obviously it has to do with my oversight. And I do see a representative from our fire department here, and maybe this is a message that our dean from UOG can carry back to our criminal justice department and the like, recognizing that Title 27, Section 3104 of the Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations for Peace Officers Standard and Training Commission Post-C applicants, which requires applicants to receive training in working with people with disabilities and training in working with people with mental health challenges. To what extent will the language access plan recognize the dual challenge that is faced by our post-certified officers, our firefighters and the like, with respect to individuals with disabilities who also speak a very limited amount of English? So I'm hoping that over time that I'll be able to work through my committee, working along with our friends at the university and our public safety agencies to be able to address this. Because I know that I've talked to my friends at the judiciary about how we already deal with mental health issues, especially in the field. But when we think about just trying to get help, maybe they might have broken an arm or a leg, or they're just trying to just get a basic, maybe first aid, and our men and women who are out in the field are absolutely handcuffed because they're unable or can't, maybe they're not able to identify certain languages, or maybe they can't speak, or they might be deaf. Some are blind, and yes, I've had blind students in my class too. And so it's providing that important service to those who need it the most. And then one last thing, if I can, when we think of data, I know that it might be limited, but I think outside of doing a better job, we probably maybe should focus on data, and they can help everyone in this room in terms of how we get other services to us. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all my questions or comments, at least at this time.
Thank you, Senator Gumatao. Senator Parkinson, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to kind of ask, have we looked into, especially for a lot of the translation stuff, have we looked into the uses of AI as a technology bridge? Because I know myself, I went to Japan for the first time ever in my life, and just with the free AI I had on my phone, I could translate everything, speak into my phone, and have it spit out, and basically got around in a foreign country I had never been in my entire life, and was able to walk around basically completely functional. And so I gotta ask, I know there's a lot of fear behind the technology of AI, but I think especially for something like this in the language assistance programs, I think there's a lot of potential uses for it. Because, there's a very, restrictive pipeline in terms of not only do we got to have a qualified teacher, now we got to have one that happens to speak Russian, but what if today it's Russian, but tomorrow it's like somebody from Zimbabwe or somebody from the Middle East or somebody from Argentina, you never know what kind of weird situations we have that lead to non-representative populations that we normally don't see here. And that got me really thinking, we can't possibly hire somebody from every single language. That's just practically impractical. But there is a necessity, it is possible we could get a single child from every different language. We live in such a globalized world that is something. So, thinking about, because I love all these devices here. I love how analog they are, but I think maybe we should start to think about maybe taking that next step into some of the more advanced stuff that's taking part in this day and age. That's I
can comment on that
real
quick. So we have started the AI implementation at the University of Guam. I hope that is pleasing to your ears. We've actually started the training for both faculty, staff, and administrators, and it is rolling out to students. Now, with regard to AI as the learning platform in our online courses, as well in face-to-face courses, we've begun using it specifically for various kinds of lessons. With regard to staff and administrators, kind of just helping with the day-to-day, right? And part of that training was just to break down the barriers, right? And break down that fear and apprehensiveness about the AI technology. What we do teach is that AI is a tool, right? It is not the means for learning or the means for instruction. It is merely a tool to complement what is going on in the classroom. So we are exploring that option. I also want to say we have translators, note takers that go with students to the classrooms. We've also got various other speakers, right, other than English across the campus, particularly in enrollment management and student success. However, English is the language of instruction at the university, but we also recognize that we have a large number of second language learners. We have the English Language Institute for those who may have a bit more trouble grasping the second language, English. We've got labs and tutors across the campus to assist with that as well. And so I do believe that we can do a better job, and I definitely want to work with GDOE, our partners, the legislature across the government, to beef up our services and see what we can do to build capacity within the workforce, so that other services can be present at Guam Behavioral Health, at the Department of Public Health and Social Services, at the Guam Police Department. On Friday, we hosted the research forum, second annual research forum at the University of Guam, and there were some police officers in attendance, and I specifically asked this question, right? We're going to the LAP for Senator Shelly Calvo. What are your plans, right? And so we had the opportunity to talk about what they were doing, right? Or how they're going to move forward. And so I think what I am most appreciative of today is the opportunity for us to break down these silos and talk to each other about the different practices. We do have the Regional Center for Public Policy at the University of Guam that can assist in streamlining some of these processes, rules, regulations, so that we are in alignment and ensuring that we're providing equitable access at all agencies. Thank you.
So this is very important, and we've recognized that. You know, in the past, we would also seek support from the Judiciary of Guam, especially for our court order evaluations, and we would coordinate, right? So we do recognize the limitations we have internally in having somebody readily available. With Guam Behavioral operating 24 hours, right? We assess people on a crisis response 24 hours, 7 days a week. So we've recognized that what happens if someone comes in 3 o'clock in the morning and we don't have someone who can provide interpreting services? What then? How do we ensure that that person is safe? How are we ensuring that we understand what that person's needs are so that we can make safe decisions and that individual is part of the decision making? That's what really kind of prompted exploring what are other options that we can have, such as, you know, why we looked into CIRICOM International interpreting services, because they offer on demand. So if we have some, you know, they do offer a wide range of languages that meets our diverse population on island, but there's also some that are one of our higher languages, but then even at that, it's limited resources, right? So is a person available for, like the Turkish language, for example, it's not as on demand as someone that needs interpreting for Tagalog speaking. So even with these additional resources, we're still faced with some limitations, but this is kind of a pathway of how can we ensure we're responding appropriately for crisis response if we don't have someone physically available in our facilities to assist.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess my last point before, we leave off is, it's something I was saying to the folks from DISID earlier. When we come to the budget season, I understand that we come with a lot of our starvation budgets. This is what we need to survive the next year. But I think to look past that, we really need to see what our budgets look like when we're not in austerity mode, when we actually have excess to commit to resources like this. What does your dream budget actually look like? The thing that gets ADA compliance happening, that gets all your programs funded. Like, even if we never could do that, knowing what that number is gives us something to aspire to in terms of what are the programs we prioritize and what ways we do it. Because if we don't know, you tell us you need $100 million budget, just pulling a number out of the air. But in reality, to do your mission, you need 170 million. Well, if you're coming here to the legislature fighting for 95, 96 million just to get through the year, we're not really addressing the problems. We're just keeping a lot of the vital organs hydrated, but none of the other things are getting the necessary resources that they need. And so, even if we aren't able to fully implement these budgets, show us the dream budgets, just so that we know how far behind the gap we really are. Because I think if we were to see that, I think it would surprise a lot of people how underserved we really are. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Parkinson, and thank you to all your testimonies. I don't really have much of a question at the moment. If there's anything, then we will just email you if something comes up. But as you can see, within this roundtable, we all understand and we can all agree that language access plan must be taken seriously and must be looked into, because it's not just for HHD demographic, and that's the truth. We've had a lot of problems even from a decade ago, and I'm pretty sure this executive order was a result of the strain that GDOE experienced in the past, having little children who speaks a different language, and all of a sudden they have to commingle with English-speaking students, so their capacity to be in the same level becomes a challenge to teachers as well. So if you look at the whole dynamic of this language, a barrier to language is really something that we should work on, especially in a small community as ours. It actually helps not just in the work process, not just in the education process, but it really defines how communication is executed. Language barrier equals difficulty and challenge in communication. So really, this, I'm glad, and I'm very grateful for all your participation today, because this actually opens up the door to address long-standing issue that should have been addressed a long time ago. And now, with all the technology that we have, gadgets, AI, and everything, I'm pretty sure we can creatively come up with a solution and a process. Technically speaking, we don't really need to complicate things. When we create the plan, I think that we can start simplifying it. For instance, when I was young in school, we were actually taught Braille. So you would think that, okay, am I going to use this every day? Probably not. But there can be times that you will assist, and guess what? I'm able to read Braille, because when I was young at school, it wasn't even an elective. It was a mandatory thing that was taught to us. So as simple as that, sign language, the basic sign language can actually be adopted in school. Just the basic, just for kids to learn at an early age. Trust me, they will carry it. I wouldn't say that perfectly I can read Braille at the moment, but I learned it in school and I carried on. Children are sponges. They will remember. So at the top of my head, because we're thinking about, we have challenges in interpreters, we have challenges in funding, we can probably accommodate teaching basic language just for that. So that comes in my mind. I have a 2-year-old in the house. He's so cute, because in school he learned certain languages, sign languages. Like if he wants to ask for more, he says more. He always asks for food. So he does this to me, and I know that he wants more food. And he learned that from school. And it's finished. I'm done. So he's been doing that since he's 1 year old. That means the ability of human to adapt and to learn is there. So I think as an elective or as some part-time curriculum in the school, it could be something that we can look at immediately, probably just until we're trying to address budget issues, personal issues, interpreter issues. Just thinking creative. Anyways, I just wanted to give everyone, including my colleagues, a big undang kalunsido usmase for being here, for all your testimonies, every single person that rendered their testimony, and every single person that's here in the hearing room, just to render support and just be here. Your mere presence speaks volume. We know that you're here because you support this initiative and you support the people, the demographic out there that we need to help. On that note, I'd like to excuse our panel and thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, my dear colleague. Anyways, to all who contributed to today's roundtable, your insights, experiences, recommendations have helped illuminate both the urgency and the opportunity before us. Across agencies and community voices, several key themes emerged. First, the need for consistent and qualified interpreter and access, especially in emergency, healthcare, and educational settings. Second, the importance of visual alert systems and captioned public communications to ensure DHH residents are not left behind during crisis. Third, the call for community-driven language access plans that reflect the lived realities and experiences of those most impacted. And finally, the recognition that workforce development and funding must be prioritized to sustain these efforts. To move this work forward, the committee will be requesting formal LAP compliance updates from all invited agencies within the next 60 days. These updates should include current protocols, identified gaps, and projected timelines for full implementation, as well as any suggestions is welcome. Agencies will also be asked to identify their designated ADA or LAP coordinators to support ongoing oversight. In addition, I will be proposing the formation of an interagency LAP task force. This will be led by the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities, or DISID, and supported by this committee. This oversight committee, you have our full support. The task force will be charged with developing shared benchmarks, coordinating technical assistance, and ensuring that LAPs are not just written, but actively implemented and evaluated. The committee will provide updates on these initiatives in the coming weeks, including opportunities for public engagement and collaboration. Again, I will reiterate that any suggestion will be grateful for any suggestion on how we can move forward. Before we adjourn, I want to sincerely thank each one of you for your time, care, and your preparation. Everything that you brought to this hearing, your perspective, whether grounded in policy, advocacy, or lived experience, are critical in shaping a more inclusive and accountable government. We invite all participants to be part of the task force effort, whether through formal membership, consultation, or continued collaboration. Your voice matters, and your partnership is truly essential. The committee will continue to receive testimony for 10 calendar days after this hearing. Please submit your testimony to the Guam Legislature mailroom or via email at Office of Senator Shelly Calvo at guamlegislature.gov. The time now is 3:49 p.m. and this roundtable is adjourned. Thank you.